Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about why leaders are not making an impact, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Jim Saliba. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you for having me on your show today.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you. Can you share with the audience about your background?
Yes, I've been in tech all my career, over 30 years. I started out as a software developer myself, grew to be a VP within a $4 billion organization, and I decided to go out on my own and do consulting, helping other organizations do changes and transformations. And what I found was there was way too much focus on the engineers themselves,
Hmm.
and there was a gap between what was happening with what I call the boots on the ground and leadership. So I started focusing on how can I help leaders close that gap and do better. And so now I'm focusing on leadership coaching in all the organizations that I get involved in.
Well, I guess let's start. Tell me a little bit more about that gap. What is it that you were seeing?
Well, I'll give you an example. Last year, tech fired or laid off 150,000 employees, another 50,000 here 6 weeks within the first year. Mainly because they hired way too much during the pandemic because they said, wow, now I can hire any place, right? And stocks went down. In these years, as the pandemic ends, places like Peloton and others are finding all of a sudden they're not selling as much because people are going back to work. So all those layoffs happened, plus thinking about a recession. Combine that with leaders who are now mostly in these organizations, millennials, Gen Z, have never seen a recession in their adult year. Add that to generally, we don't do leadership training until 10 years after they've been a leader. Put all those three things together, and we're going to have a problem coming out in the next couple of years within tech, I believe,
And what
all
are
due to leadership.
Yeah, and what are some of those symptoms then that companies would be seeing?
Well, some of the symptoms would be I see a lot of people move up within the organization, promoted because of their technical expertise, but they are now moving into a world where they have to manage people and lead people. And it's a completely different skill set. And if we're not even giving them training to it until 10 years later, how much damage have we done in between? This is why I hear often from directors and so on in organizations that they feel stuck in their career. They can't move up. They get things like in their review, oh, I need to be more strategic or I need more executive presence. But we don't talk about what those are. So how do we expect them to actually do those things if we can't actually measure them? And on the other side, I see from executives, senior executives, they tell me my leadership team are glorified managers. They're waiting for me to tell them what to do. They can't take ownership of a business issue on their own and drive it from beginning to end, which I need them to do. Well, that's basically because we haven't given them the tools to do it.
Mm. And so I mean, I guess to kind of illustrate what how that problem plays out, what do companies see when they're not preparing these leaders and not engaging them, in training for 10 years? Like, how does that play out then in the organization and what damage that can it do?
Well, it can do, okay, how it plays out, let's look at that first. I'm talking, for example, a CTO I'm coaching right now, and she said to me, my leadership team is not doing what I need to do. And I said, well, grade them. overall, would you give them an A, a B, a C, a D? What would you give them? She said, on their best day, they're a C plus.
Mm.
And on my worst day, I really need a team that's a B. So she already knows she's not getting what she needs. She's seeing that when she asks for slides that may be going into the board deck, she has to really chase them for them. She doesn't get what she really needs. So, as a leader, she's spending much more time managing, almost micromanaging people rather than getting what she needs.
Mhm.
How much damage? Well, the CEO now is spending much more time managing the pieces that need to get done rather than looking forward of what do we need to be doing to increase our revenue, what do we need to be a healthy organization, what's my customer satisfaction, what's my employee satisfaction. She doesn't have time to look at those.
Right. And then I suppose, I mean, most people don't like being micromanaged, so I would imagine that would play out in turnover then eventually.
Well, that happens a lot, especially when people move up, as I said, being promoted because of their technical skills, not because of their leadership skills. And they end up in a position thinking that I'm here because I know what I'm doing, I know how to do it, so you should do it my way. And becomes the birth of micromanaging. And we
Yeah.
see this all the time in mid level.
Mm. And so maybe it would be interesting to see if you've seen any trends about, I know you're kind of focused in on the tech area, but what would be the biggest gaps between, or the biggest areas of deficiency when a person who gets promoted who hasn't had any leadership experience, what are those skill sets that tend to be missing?
Well, of course, we don't know how to deal with people. There is a whole emotional intelligence piece that is missing there, or maybe not missing, just not well practiced. When I coach people and we're looking at things that they need to work on, I divide it into four quadrants. One is vision and strategy. Can I build a vision for my team or my department? It I'm not talking about the vision statement that we make for a company, but what do I want my team or my department to look like 1 year from now? A lot of people can't do that. Second is how well am I executing? Do I know how to measure how well I'm executing and producing? The third quadrant is about people and processes. Can I make change within my department and organization, or is the corporate culture fighting me on this, right? Because I'm trying to do something different. Often, systems and processes that they have in place have been put in place for a long time, and they may not be doing the best benefit now. Can we review them? Can we change them? Or are people going to say that's just not the way we do things? And then the fourth quadrant would be executive presence. Can I communicate well? Do I carry myself well? Do I listen well and understand what's going on, right? And then I put that all in action. So we look at those four quadrants with a client, and they are able to kind of pick a little bit from column A and column B to decide on the things that they want to work on.
So I'd like to, I guess, look at this from the perspective of the company and then the individual. So what is your recommendation then that companies should be implementing to address this situation?
Well, it's interesting. We shouldn't wait 10 years before we give people training. And training is very interesting in that often the corporate type of training that we do, people go off to a class for 3 days, 4 days, and we expect them to come back as an expert.
Mm.
But we don't work that way. You have to start trying things out and seeing what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what's your style, what's your skill set that you need to develop and keep developing. Records, I mean, statistics have shown If we don't put into action what we have learned, a lot of the training that we've learned in that 1 week course, we forgot within 7 to 10 days. We
Mhm.
forgot about it. So we're spending about $1.6 billion a year in North America on training that isn't really going anywhere. Coaching, mentoring does a really good job because what happens there is we get somebody to try something. And
Mhm.
then in another session, we come back and we say, well, how did it go? Well, it worked a little bit, it didn't work a little bit. Well, how are you going to adjust it? How are you going to do better? Are you going to try something completely different? Adults are experiential learners. When we were in elementary school, we learned like a sponge. People say things, we absorb it in. As adults, we're not that like that. We learn by doing, and the only way we're going to get that value is by trying things out and experimenting. Now, when I work with someone, we put those experiments together. I say experiment like a fifth grader. When I was in fifth grade, we had to do a science fair project, right, with the whole poster board, and we had to put a hypothesis. And then we had to put what the experiment was. And then did we prove or disprove the hypothesis? This is the exact same thing with a time bound. I think that if I do this with my team, I'm going to get that. What's the minimum thing I can do to test that out? That's the experiment. And how long should it be before I see something? 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And whatever that is, you're deciding up front. Then when you get to that time, did it work or didn't work? So experiment like a fifth grader, and you'll be able to turn things around.
Do you find this that it's hard to sway organizations to want to invest in training in general, but then even more so in training like this? Because obviously that one-on-one type of arrangement tends to be more expensive. So how do you find organizations reacting to, whether there's an ROI?
Well, it is hard to get money spent that way, especially at high levels. CEOs are more looking at, I need revenue, I need this. They're looking at different metrics, and they're not really looking at the performance of the organization to help drive that. But it makes a big difference. It's just very hard to draw a line, direct line between one and the other. But I have definitely seen in my experience spending a little bit money on this type of training greatly pays for itself in the long run.
Mm.
Now, we can look at that in historically, coaching was given to people who, well, he has a bad manners, we don't want to lose him, but it was kind of to fix people. Now it's more given as a benefit, a kudos for their best people. So the stigma to it is really turning around. And if you look at it, every high paid sports person has multiple coaches. A coach of the whole team, they have an individual coach for themselves, maybe multiple coaches for the different type of things that they have to do in that sport.
Right. Um, so have you seen any sort of way to connect the metrics? I know you said it's difficult, but has anything risen to the top as if you invest here, here's some places where you'll start to see the impact?
Well, we start seeing the impact more in productivity and creativity. Um, I've been a lot in the software development because I'm tech and the agile world of having to do agile development, which has built into it giving the teams and the employees more of their own decision making to make things happen, being clear on what the goals are, but let them decide what happens. Well, that takes a lot of coaching for them to make that happen. So If in the beginning we would see how much productivity that we have going on, once we start the coaching and the team starts to learn how to work better as a team rather than as a set of individuals, we start seeing productivity and innovation go up. So it's definitely measurable.
Um, and how about let's like look at it now, I guess, from the individual side. So maybe my company's not investing in me. Um, what should I think about?
Um, when I first became a manager, I had the same problem, right? I went from being an individual contributor, there was a big reshuffle in the organization, and all of a sudden I was the manager of three managers, and each of those three managers had a team. I wanted to be a good leader, so I started reading all kinds of books and stuff that was out there. One of the first books I read was from Brian Tracy. I don't remember the exact title because he has so many books out there. But he does have this thing called the 3% rule. And you can look up Brian Tracy 3% rule. And it'll show you that his recommendation is to take 3% of your salary and invest it in yourself. Just 3%. And that's what I did. And I started buying books and going to seminars. And as my salary went up, I was able to do more things with it. But that is what allowed me to really grow and be successful in many of the things that I've done. I even went back to university and got an MBA at that time, which was very helpful for me. Um, but that 3% rule worked really great. So I would definitely recommend that.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that. That's very interesting. I imagine that some people might feel like, wow, that's a lot of money. If they're making $100,000 or something. But I guess, it sounds like you're saying that the dividends are there. So anything more that you might say around that?
Well, some years I did more than others. It wasn't always 3%, but I could see that just the concept of investing in myself, not only in money, but in time, was much bigger than the investment that the company was making in my growth in that. So that allowed me to grow. And what also happened as I became better as a leader, I started changing how I did my one-on-ones, for example, with my team. I said, okay, we don't talk about status in our one-on-ones. It's about what are you doing? What do you need? It's your agenda. You decide it. But at least once a month, we have to talk about your personal development.
Mm.
And over time, as people came and left in my organization, and actually I was leaving the organization, going to another group within the company, and people who had my one-on-one said, can you still have the monthly meeting with me to talk about development? Because I can't tell you how much I get out of that. So really, it's just having the focus and the attention, and it makes the team significantly better.
You were mentioning about how, going to events or training or things like that, that often a lot of it gets not implemented or forgotten. And I've heard through my years at conferences a lot of the same messaging and also tips on how to beat the odds there. What do you recommend, to people who are attending some sort of training, how they can actually get the most out of it?
Practice what you learn as fast as possible. Try it out, experiment. And you don't have to wait to go to training. There are so many other ways to get information nowadays, like a podcast like this. I mean, and it doesn't cost anything. So that 3% rule can buy you so much more than in the past when I first started.
Yeah, I mean, it could be even 3% of your time. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be money, but if you're focusing even 3% of your time, you'd probably see results.
Yes, I would agree. And experiment, try things out. When I talk to leaders and they say, what are the 5 top skills I need? Or there's tons of articles out there, and they talk about communication, they talk about, listening and all that stuff. My top two, that tops all of them, is self awareness
Mm.
and self development. Because without those two, the other ones don't really mean anything.
Mm, absolutely. Do you think leaders have, from a growth perspective, is there a, I don't know, like a ceiling that they hit or a point where they like cap out on their ability, or is your ability to grow as a leader unlimited? Or if there is a ceiling, is it just a figment of our imaginations? Like what are your thoughts around that?
I don't think there is a ceiling at all. I believe in learning. I believe that the day I stop learning is the day that I'm no longer on this earth. I believe in learning every day, looking at different things that are happening out there. And if we don't learn, we're standing still. And if we're standing still, we're actually going backwards because people are passing us. If one thing that COVID showed us is that the whole world can change instantly. And unless we're learning and changing with it and understanding how we can work in new environments, people are going to pass us. I might as well get out of the game.
Hmm. Yeah. What impact do you have, like though that or sorry, do you have thoughts on how whether or not people have like limiting beliefs that are impacting their growth?
Ah, of course.
Mm.
We all have self sabotaging stories that are going around in our head. Um, I have what I call the 4 fears of leadership. The first one is the fear of being incompetent, or sometimes we call imposter syndrome. This really kills self confidence. The second one is the fear of appearing foolish. It stops people from talking in meetings, for example. It stops people from taking on things. I may be looking to not make a decision, so my boss makes it. So if it goes wrong, now I have someone to blame because it wasn't me. So I don't appear foolish. There is the fear of failure, which we all know what that is. And there's the fear of being vulnerable, that I'm giving up power, I'm giving up something. So those 4 fears often stop us from moving forward. And we've all felt them at some point in time. Mine, I can tell you, I'm a perfectionist. So that may be a combination of fear of failure and fear of appearing foolish. I don't know. And that perfectionism causes a lot of procrastination. And when I recognize it, I have to stop, I have to breathe, I have to tell myself to get over it and move forward.
Yeah. And so how do you find that people can identify these pretty easily? Do people have that self-awareness, or do you find that that people are challenged in figuring out what's holding them back?
It's challenging in finding that out. That self awareness that I talked about before, that for leadership self awareness is so important. This is part of it. Um, Often I'll be working with a client and I just do what we call the 5 whys. And they tell me about something, and I'm like, well, why is that? And they tell me something else, well, why is that? Until we get to the core and they start thinking about, oh, because I'm afraid that something's going to happen. And often they don't like to use the word fear. It shows up in a different word. Well, I'm concerned about this. Someone may say that, but we're talking about fear. And
Mm,
it's there, it's built into our brain. This is our lizard brain, our old brain from being the caveman days that protect us. It's trying to have us flight or fight anything that the brain perceives may hurt us physically, psychologically, emotionally.
Hmm. And so, what are some of your, I guess, the advice you give for people who maybe they get to the point they do identify it, but now are having a hard time moving past it?
Yes, well, it's something we work on every day, including myself. But identifying it is the first spot. Then is talking about or looking at, well, what is it that I'm really afraid to happen? In my earlier in my career, I took a Dale Carnegie course, and we talked about this a little bit. And their method was to think about the worst thing that can happen, put a few things into place to mitigate it, and then you don't have to be afraid because you know you're going to take care of the worst thing that can happen anyway.
Hmm. Yeah, that's how I went, made the leap to go out away from corporate America onto my own. Was exactly that. Was like, well, what's the worst could happen? And it was like, well, I'll go bankrupt, but then I'll just go live in my parents' basement. uh, well, that would suck. It's not the worst thing that could, I mean, like things could be far worse.
Right, right, exactly. So we figure it out and we say, what's the worst thing?
Yeah.
And now that we know we could live with that worst thing, 95% of that time, the worst thing never even comes close to happening.
Interesting. And you find that's the case that works in all four of those fears that you listed. I mean, like it makes sense to me for fear of failure. But the vulnerability one, I kind of wonder about.
Well, often that one is I'm afraid that someone's going to take away my power. I'm afraid that something's going to happen and I have shame. Well, what could happen for those things to happen? What could shame me? Same thing. Well, if I could list those things that shame me, what are things that I could do to mitigate it?
Hmm,
And also, the other thing is, are they true?
yeah.
Am I afraid of the truth? And if they are true, then should I be afraid of it anymore or should I hold it and welcome it or make it a skill to work on?
Yeah, I think it is sometimes difficult as, especially as you move up in the leader, like as a leader, like let's say maybe you have a strategic project or something, and it's
Mm-hmm.
between, you know, that you could, I don't know, I'm trying to make up a scenario that goes with this, but like that you could be a shoe in, but maybe that's actually not the best thing for you to do, but like you're saying, you're afraid to lose that control. But um on one hand, this is really important to you, but maybe it's not the right thing. How do you, I guess, come to terms with that it's not the right thing, and deal with that?
Well, often if I'm in mid, or maybe even some upper management, I have my people that I can talk to,
Mm-hmm.
that I am open to talk to. I may have a mentor, and we can talk it out, and we can understand what's working, what's not working, what are the risks. Should I be holding on to this? Shouldn't I be? As you move further and further up, you have less and less of those people that you can actually open up and talk to because you're expected to know everything. Well, nobody knows everything. So it's often, and this is why some specialized coaching for CEOs, which I do, come in handy because it gives them a sounding board. And I can't tell you how many times my client is saying something and in mid sentence say, now that I'm hearing myself say it out loud, this is not, this won't happen. This is not true. I've been afraid of it for nothing.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think the other thing, the further you go up, is I find it there's less people who can relate to you. So even if you your social circles might have even changed. And so people
Hmm.
that you used to rely on for a sounding board just can't even grasp the nature of what you're dealing with.
Yes, that's very true. So you have to find that when we go to the gym, they say you have to have a buddy to keep you in there and going. And when you don't feel like going, well, you kind of need that here too. You need that sounding board. You need someone to work off of. If it's a friend, if it's family, if it's a coach, don't go it alone. Have that sounding board. It is worth whatever you have to pay for it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And so, how do you if somebody I guess wants to kind of take control of their growth and maybe they're looking to be promoted or something and they want to make maybe that's their goal. How should they approach like deciding what to do and where to put that attention? And there are lots of resources, like you said. So, how do they approach planning that out?
Well, actually, I wrote a book around that, and it's called The Six Steps of Leadership Challenge. And in the first couple of steps is about looking at where am I now? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my values? And I added in the second step, how do I engage the world or the environment around me? Or how do I think I should be doing it? The third step starts looking into, well, where do I want to be? What's my vision? Where do I want to be a year from now? And that vision could be for me as an individual, it could be for my department, it could be for my team, it could be for my whole company, right? Where do I want to be? Now you understand the gap, where you are now and where you want to be. It's building a bridge. I know the two sides. Now what kind of bridge do I need in between? Is it a small foot bridge? Is it a big steel and cable bridge, suspension bridge? What do I need? So that's where my four quadrants come in: the vision, the execution, the culture and systems, and the executive presence. We start kind of looking at that as what are the pieces we need to build. We start looking at that. Well, we can't do them all. Let's pick the priorities for this quarter. And we build a 30, 60, 90-day plan, which in my book, it has in that 30, 60, 90-day plan, each swim lane is one of those four quadrants. So you're doing something in all of them. And there's a learning component. Every 30 days, you're looking at and say, what have I tried? Back to experiments. What have I tried and what have I learned? Now I can adjust the next 30 days. And after that quarter is done, we do it all over again. Where am I? Where am I going? And what are the next set of skills that I need to grow?
What value do you place? You're just reminding me with all that reflection. Value do you place on journaling? Like I've heard like Dale Carnegie did a lot of journaling,
Hmm.
and I hear about it from a lot of leaders.
So I have this book right here. So I do it as well. I write notes, and I like doing it by hand and not type it in. Whatever it takes to do self-reflection, and there's many different ways. People meditate, people do journaling, but it's taking a look at what we did and what's happening and how is it working for us. It is a big key for us to move forward. That's the self-awareness. I love journaling, but I have clients who will never ever do it, right? So it has to be something that you find that works for you, and we try different things.
Hmm. Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Jim would love to hear, what you want to leave top of mind with our audience.
Well, I would say three things. Self awareness is key. Being able to look at what's going on in you and around you to understand what things you need to tackle. Self development. We're constantly learning, we're constantly changing the environment around us. Development is key. And third is don't go it alone, find support.
Absolutely. Those are great tips. And so, how can folks learn more about what you do or where to get in touch with you?
Well, you can get in touch with me at my website, of course. That would be the first place, and that's jamessaliba.com. Easy enough. I'm also, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty much there every day or so, so I'll get back to you probably pretty quickly there. Um, so those will probably be the two best places.
And you mentioned you have a book. Where can folks find that?
Oh, yes, my book is on Amazon.com, of course. You can find it under my name, James Saliba, or look up the Six Step Leadership Challenge.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.
Hey! Short